All right, and we are on. So thank you so much, Byron, for joining me today. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Thanks.
So we recently connected. So this is great in, me getting to know you as well a little bit more. And so the little that I do know about you and you being an attorney. So right now you're in the Buffalo area, correct?
Correct.
Buffalo, New York. Okay,
Buffalo,
cool.
New York.
So how does a once attorney turn to not an attorney and then doing what you're doing now? If you can bring us back.
So, going back to my earliest memories, right? I always wanted to be an attorney. But there were other things I was super attracted to, right? So when I go back to my childhood, I was attracted to the law, and I had these visions of being the next Thurgood Marshall and this civil rights attorney who was fighting for civil rights and fighting for minorities and fighting for the poor. That was my thought and my goal. But there were these other things that I was attracted to. I was attracted to street life. I was attracted to the streets, the guys who were moving and shaking out there, the guys who were, driving around in nice cars and had the nice clothes and had cell phones when nobody else had cell phones. So as attracted as I was to the idea of being this big civil rights attorney, I was also attracted to being, the next big baller, right? So ultimately, by the time I became an attorney, I kind of lost some of that, the spirit of altruism. And I turned my legal practice towards a representation that, while still good and still useful to the world, provided me with more access to the streets than I probably needed, right? It provided me with an amount of money I didn't need. It provided me with close ties to people I didn't need to be tied to. And that desire to be part of the streets continued to get fueled.
Right. And how old were you at this time?
So I was a non-traditional legal student. So I went to college, and I had a whole other career before I was a lawyer. And then in my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, I went to law school. Okay. So by that time, I was heavily into my addiction. So I went to law school heavily addicted. And yet when I came out, in 33, 34 years old, I landed a really great job. And yet again, I was heavily addicted. I was an active, raging alcoholic by the time I entered the legal practice.
And yet a functioning addict.
I would say a functioning addict. I don't necessarily like that term, although I get what it means. Because at the end of the day, I wasn't functioning at all. I was able to meet some of my obligations, but as far as functioning, like an ongoing functioning human concern, I was well past that. I'd stopped being that in my 20s.
Got it.
Yeah. So by the time I went through that process and then got my taste of street life and found myself on the verge of being disbarred and found myself being chased around by the FBI and found myself in an awful lot of trouble, I realized that this way of life wasn't working. But by that time I basically flushed my career down the toilet. And I was able to find recovery after 27 years as an active addict. I found recovery in 2013. And so many things changed in my life. Yes, I lost my ability to practice law, and I lost my ability to do a lot of things. But I started a journey that allowed me to clean up the wreckage of that past, allowed me to be a functioning member of society. So today I'm functioning. And then allowed me to start using my experience to help other men.
Right. So it sounds like you were pushing the boundaries as far as you could until you were on the verge of being disbarred. Do you think that if you didn't have the FBI in your case and you didn't have this threat of losing your license, that you would have kept going with street life?
The street life had defeated me. So
Okay.
the FBI isn't what got me sober. It was being tired. I was
Right.
tired. I was done. I had enough.
You're exhausted.
I was exhausted. All my resources were exhausted. My relationships were gone. So even though there were still people around me, these were relationships that were toxic and based on all kinds of using. And I was done. I was done. I had two choices in my belief. This is my utter belief. I had one choice, which is keep using and dying very soon, like not long. I wasn't long for the world, or to get some help. Those were my two choices. The option to continue using was over. I like to tell people, like, I used up all the drugs and alcohol that I could by the time I was 41. I used them up.
Right.
I didn't have, there was no more I could use. Now I could either be on the earth not using or not be on the earth, but there was no more drugs and alcohol for me to use. I was done.
So where did that light bulb moment come from?
It came from a moment, actually. I got my final DUI on August 10th of 2013. And God's honest truth, I really don't remember what happened. I do remember waking up the next morning and seeing all these papers around me, right? They were all legal papers. It was the 14 charges that I'd been charged with in achieving that last DUI. And I say achieving because that was the end. The FBI couldn't do it. A divorce couldn't do it. Other people who wanted me to get sober couldn't do it. It was waking up and just being like, wow, every time I walk out of my house, I'm law enforcement involved. How did I go from being this respected attorney to every time I walk out of my house, I'm law enforcement involved? I was that much of a menace to my community that I could not walk out of my home without becoming law enforcement involved.
Wow.
Because I couldn't walk out of my home without using something. I could not walk out of my home without a substance.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I came into conflict with everybody who I encountered.
When you said achieving the DUI, do you say it in a way that it became, because flip the script, we talk about the gift and the pain and how there's a blessing in certain things that happen in our life. Is that how you relate to it?
I call it the blessing of my bottom. It's the blessing of my bottom. I hit my bottom.
Right.
And it was, for all the other things that were so much, there were things that happened to me that were so much larger than that moment. But that was the bottom. That was the moment when I was like, how do I keep on doing this? It was such a blessing. It's a place I take myself back to quite often because it was a place of such degradation. Like the degradation I felt when I woke up in my bed, looked around, and there were nothing but legal papers around me about the crimes I had committed the day before.
Yeah.
It was too much. And it's such a blessing because it reminds me that that's what my desire to be in the streets got me. That's what it got me. Even with the FBI stuff, like some of that was kind of glorified, right? Like there was a part of me who was so delusional in my addiction that I was kind of like, yeah, I'm a cool guy, man. Look at this. I'm gonna take on the FBI. I got this. And I was able to forward that delusion for quite some time. But looking around at myself as a guy who was just laying in his bed with a bunch of DUI papers around him, that was my bottom. I achieved my bottom. That was it.
Yeah.
Because there was no more space for me to question what I was, right? I took my first step on my bed, which is I'm powerless over alcohol. My life has become unmanageable. And I got all the information right here in front of me telling me that that's exactly who I am.
Right. So you hit rock bottom, and then what becomes the next step? Are you like lost at what to do next, or was that clear for you? What was the next?
So it's my belief that God put something on my heart because I made a decision that wasn't mine, right? It was not my decision to ask for help, but I literally just drove to the hospital, walked into an emergency room, and like a crazy person just screamed, I need help to quit drinking. I need help to stop using substances. And I literally just screamed that. I was completely sober. I wasn't drunk or hungover. I just walked into an emergency room and was like, I'm lost. I need help.
I
And
don't
they
know if
took,
it's me that froze or you that froze.
I don't know. There you
Okay,
go. You're back.
you're back as well. Okay, perfect.
So I walked into an emergency room in my local hospital. It was Howard County General Hospital in Maryland. And I literally exclaimed, I need help to stop using substances. I can't stop alone.
Yeah.
And that was never a thought that had come to my mind. That was a movement that God had put on my heart, because that was not the way I lived my life. I didn't run around asking people for help. I thought I was pretty self-sufficient.
Sure, yeah.
And from that moment, I became somebody who was different. It literally was different from the first day. I became coachable. I started to be able to take people's suggestions and take people's advice, and start this path in recovery, because I was so lost. I didn't know what to do. I was like a puppy dog.
Yeah.
I had no idea what to do. And so I was fortunate enough to enter a rehabilitation facility where I met my first sponsor,
Okay.
who was a kind man. He did some things that were amazing to me, like show up on time. And it's funny because that little moment was something that told me that recovery could work. Here was a man who talked drunk to a drunk. He demonstrated to me that he also had the disease of addiction. But here he was 15 years at the time into sobriety, and he could show up on time, which was something I was completely incapable of doing. So here is a man who was demonstrating to me the first inkling of the gifts of sobriety. And I just grabbed onto it and did what he told me to do.
Wow.
Really that simple.
And it's interesting because when you showed up at the hospital, basically screaming for help, it's akin to making a choice, like showing up when you're ready, declaring that you're ready. And like you said, you felt different. Like things
Right.
just, now the trajectory of your life has shifted. And this guy, whether you call it angel in disguise, perfect person came into your life. And so then you continue on this path of sobriety. And what helped you stay on that path of sobriety? Because a lot of people relapse.
So when I got sober, there were these things in my life that I had done over the course of 27 years. The way I like to describe it is I had piled up a pile of garbage behind me. This pile of garbage was chasing me. It stunk. It got all over me, and it permeated everything I did, right? And so what my program of recovery did is it made me, instead of running away from that pile of garbage, it made me turn my attention towards it. So some people come into recovery and they hit a pink cloud where they're like, life is great. Life wasn't great. Life actually got really, really ugly when I got sober, because I finally had to turn my attention to the garbage that I had done. So it was things like the federal crimes that I had committed. It was things like how I had devastated a marriage, how I had mishandled money, how I had been an absent father. Like there were these things I had to turn my attention to and really immerse myself in faith in order to be able to know that there was a way I could solve these problems. And there were some consequences to some of the things that I did. And I needed to be able to face those consequences sober in order to put myself in right relationship with the world. And that's what kept me going. It was the hope. And that's all it was. It was the hope that if I kept on going, kept on doing what these men told me to do, that if I kept throwing out a piece of this garbage day after day, eventually that pile of garbage would be gone. And there would be some elements of that garbage that were going to be really hard and they're going to be really nasty to play with. And they're not going to want to go in the garbage bag really easily. They're going to want to fight. Some of them were going to be alive. But at the end of the day, there were people who told me that if I kept doing what I was doing, no matter how hard it was, if I kept doing what I was doing, I would eventually find a life of freedom, joy, and happiness.
Yeah.
And they were right.
Sounds like you're taking responsibility for your past, and it's very hard to face those shadows, you know. And I always talk about having you need a blank canvas to start and you know, a fresh new painting, a fresh piece of art to create newly. And a lot of people try to paint on a pile of shit. That's what I say.
Oh.
And it's hard to do the work. It's not easy, and it brings up a lot of triggers, and it's easier just to forget about it and avoid it. But yet those things will just keep showing up in your life until you actually deal with it.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, having started that work and having done as much as that work as I've had in the nearly 7 years that I've been in recovery, like, the one thing that happened, and it happened overnight, and I didn't know when it was going to happen, but somehow, somewhere between like 5 and 6 years, something snapped in my body and in my life that said, hey man, I'm worth good things now. Like, I had finally done enough of the cleanup of my past that I finally found work. I found self-worth. And that didn't happen right away, but it did happen one day. And I can remember distinctly, there was one day I didn't feel like that. And then there was the next day I did.
Yeah.
It was just like an overnight deal, but it took me some time in recovery to start feeling that way.
And doesn't it feel amazing? Like, yeah, going through the past might have hurt and there's a lot of painful moments, but doesn't it feel amazing to have confronted your past and your shadows and now be where you are now?
It does. And the great news is that once you get a little bit into recovery, and once, you know, in my instance, part of my recovery process was going to prison. Like, once I did that, I was bitter. I didn't want to go to prison. I was 2.5 years sober before I went to prison for what I had done when I was drunk and using, right? And so there was a part of me that was disconnected so far from, like, damn it, I'm not this guy anymore. And there was a man who had to sit me down and be like, yeah, but you were. And this is part of the consequence of cleaning that up. Yeah. Here's the great news. After you clean this up, after you go do your time, and after you go sit down on the bench, because the government's sitting you down on the bench, you don't have to ever do this again. You never have to be that person again. All you have to do is stay sober. All you have to do is stop using substances, and you'll never be in this position again. Like, isn't that brilliant? 10.5 months, and you'll never have to do this again. As opposed to the way you were living for 27 years, where every day you were facing the possibility of going to prison for life, because that's how I behaved. That's how I lived. What if I had killed somebody on that last DUI? Right? What if? I was so drunk, I don't remember it happening. What if that had happened, and then suddenly I was facing a lifetime of incarceration because of my behavior? That's how I lived. So it was one period of time where I had to go sit down on the bench. I had to go look at some other men who were behaving exactly like I was. I had to learn from them, and they could learn from me as well if we were approaching this appropriately. And that's what I started doing. I took it for what it was.
So you had this moment here, and you mentioned about helping these other guys, or how you guys can help one another. What is it that you are working on now? Like, what, after all of this experiences that you've been through, what is it that you want to do and give back to these men or women?
So, and I focus primarily on men, working with other men in recovery. And there's 100,000 reasons for that we don't have to get into today. But I focus on men in recovery, and I focus on men who've been formerly incarcerated. I can relate to their experience. I get what they're going through. And I also understand something that sometimes society doesn't, which is, you know, not everybody who gets locked up wants to get out and start living the way they used to. One of the things that was an eye-opener for me when I went to prison, I thought I was the only one who was done, right? I thought I was the only person who was walking into the doors of prison like, hey, I'm done, I'm a reformed guy. Here's what I learned. There's a huge amount of men who are done. They're done. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I was fortunate to have men who were guiding me through this new process of life. And some of them are done, but don't have anybody to guide them. So what I'm trying to do, and I started an initiative not long ago called FIRM, which is Formerly Incarcerated and Recovering Men. And what
That's a
FIRM
great name,
seeks
by
to
the
do,
way, especially as a former attorney.
I'm not bad at naming stuff.
Nice branding.
But what I'm trying to do and what we're trying to do, because in my mind, it's a movement and an initiative. It's nothing that's from me. It's from God.
Yeah.
But it seeks to take men who have decided that they're done and put them together with people who have also decided that they're done, but have been a little further down the road than they are, right? So somebody who's newly out of prison, but they've made a decision to change their life, they might not know how to enter entrepreneurial endeavors. They might not know how to seek other kinds of employment and skills development. They might not know how to reintegrate into their families. They might not know a lot of things, even though they know they're done, right? And so what I try to do is almost in a peer-to-peer way, partner men who have already traveled that journey and can give good, solid, strong advice and mentorship with people who are prepared to travel that journey, but might not know how to get there. And together we talk about these things, and you know, I'm hopeful that as it grows, we get into a place where, you know, these entrepreneurs are hiring these new guys. They become friends. They become partners in business, partners in the community, partners in working on some of the issues that keep that revolving door of incarceration open. We're going to try to close that from the outside rather than from the end.
That's beautiful work that you're doing. You know, number one, it takes something to go through your own shit, and then another thing to then want to do something for other people. So I think it's a beautiful initiative that you have started here. And you're right, like so many guys, like, you know, from experience, are done with their, you know, criminal lifestyle, their drug addiction, and don't have the guidance. And unfortunately, a lot of society looks at these guys like, why should we help you? Like, all they see is the crime. Like, you're a useless piece of garbage. You don't deserve anything.
Right. I've been laughing recently because, like, as a convicted felon, I'm not eligible for like any COVID funds, right? It doesn't mean that COVID hasn't kept me in the house and wrecked my business, right? It doesn't. Like, it has. But as a convicted felon, for whatever reason,
you're not entitled.
I'm not entitled to be able to survive. And, you know, I'm zen with that. Like, I am super zen with my behavior put me in this position, but it just illustrates the point that you just made, which is, hey, society looks at us like we're about to go back, right? Like, they wonder why we get let out. I was sentenced to 10.5 months in prison, and there are some people that wondered why I ever got out. Well, I served my sentence. That's what you guys said the sentence was. But in partnership with other men who've been through this process, just like when I first came into recovery and discovered that, hey, I can survive. This can be okay. There's a day when I don't have to be this anymore. The same goes for people who are coming out of incarceration. You don't have to live like this anymore. And in partnership, we can ensure together that we never go back, right? That we never go back. We can do a better job doing that together than we can individually.
Yeah, and you're lowering recidivism rates by doing this work.
Yep.
You know, it's absolutely beautiful. And we should talk further beyond this interview, because we flip the script. You know, we have an online community now, and there's a section where guys who've been through incarceration and or drug addiction history can list their businesses and support one another. And also the community itself, you know, that just the public, mostly Toronto based, but anywhere, they can then see that list and say, hey, I want to support these guys.
I love it. I love it. I would love to continue that conversation.
Yeah, beautiful. Wow. And so so the name of it's called FIRM.
It's called FIRM. Right.
And so if they wanted to find out more information, where would they go to?
So where they would go right now is my website called www.sobershit.com, and that's SOBERSHYT.com. And there they will find a blog, and I am developing the website for this within that framework. So I've got other ventures. I've got a blog where I talk about recovery and how fun recovery is. I also do some consulting with attorneys who work with addicts like me,
Okay.
trying to get them to understand some of the ins and outs of working with an addict. And I also do some professional responsibility stuff with attorneys who might be addicts like I am. But within that, they will also find information about Firm probably on Monday.
Oh, perfect.
So
Okay, coming soon.
we're working on that. We're working on that.
All right, perfect. So by the time this interview is released, something should be there.
By the time this interview released, something will be there. Absolutely.
Beautiful. And my other question for you is it just in the New York area, or who do you serve?
So right now it's just in the New York area.
Okay.
I would like to expand back to Maryland, where I was barred to practice law. And I would like to expand to some other areas in the United States that I'm familiar with and that I have contacts with. Slowly but surely, I think this initiative will take hold. I don't believe myself to be the sole proprietor of this initiative. My hope is that other people will take hold of it and also make it their own in their own communities. So places like Baltimore, where I've lived, or places like Washington, D.C., where I've lived, to find men who are engaged in this conversation and just under the banner of this, be able to take this and make it their own for their community. So
That's amazing.
that's my ultimate goal. I mean, that was what I would love to have happen. My name doesn't have to be on the front, but I would love to see men more engaged in this conversation and more engaged with each other. One of the things the system tries to do is keep us apart, right? But once we're done with our process, we have the right to interface with whoever we want to, right? And so it's my goal and you know, my ultimate dream that these men are having these conversations outside of the walls of prison, and that they're doing positive things with one another in order to make sure that no one goes back.
Yeah, very cool work, Byron.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to share?
I mean, the biggest thing that I would share is the same thing that I've been saying. The first step of recovering from anything is accepting the circumstance as it is, right? When I first came into recovery, my circumstance was pretty ugly, right? And having to turn and face the circumstances as they were was hard. But at the same time, once you have acceptance, you actually have the start of the solution. And no matter what the problem is, there is a solution, particularly if your problem is substance abuse. There's a solution, there's a way out, and there is a life beyond your wildest dreams in recovery. So that's what I'd love to leave you with.
Oh, beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Again, it's sobershit.com.
Sobershit.com.
With a Y.
SOBERSHYT. Absolutely.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Byron. And you are definitely someone who has flipped your script.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, with God's help, I absolutely have.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. We will chat soon.
All right. Sounds great. Thank you.
Ciao.